He wrote their goodbyes before he took their lives. Ethan Mallory stood at the front of the church. His voice cracked with emotion as he read Hannah Whitaker's eulogy. People wiped tears. They believed he was grieving. But only one person in that room knew the horrifying truth. Ethan wasn't mourning her death. He caused it. And what happened next shocked everyone. Cedar Falls, Iowa. A small town where doors were left unlocked and neighbors trusted each other. Hannah Whitaker, just 28, was a teacher loved by her students. Her laughter was the kind that echoed through halls and made bad days lighter. And Ethan Mallory? He was the soft-spoken church organist, always there at community gatherings. Known as the man who could put words together beautifully for memorials, people trusted him with their grief. But behind the polite smile was something darker. Something no one could see. This is Behind the Crime. We post daily. Subscribe so you never miss a case. Hannah Whitaker's life was the kind that seemed ordinary on the surface, but to those who knew her, it was anything but. At 28, she was the kind of teacher who didn't just assign homework but inspired her students to see the world differently. Her classroom at Cedar Falls Elementary was filled with handmade posters, stacks of brightly colored books, and a jar of candy she used to reward good answers. Parents admired her patience, children adored her warmth, and colleagues called her the heart of the school. Outside of work, Hannah was the kind of daughter every parent prayed for. She never missed her Sunday visits to her mom and dad's house, where she would linger over homemade pot roast, laughing as her father teased her about her growing jungle of houseplants. Her apartment was small, but she made it feel like a sanctuary, walls lined with photos, shelves stuffed with novels, and little candles that gave off the faint scent of vanilla whenever she studied late into the night. Her friends described her as grounded, but also adventurous in quiet ways. She wasn't the type to travel across the world, but she loved spontaneous road trips to the next town, late-night board games, and local concerts. She had just started dating again after a long breakup, though she kept her heart guarded. Life, it seemed, was opening up new chapters for her. And then there was Ethan Mallory, the organist at the church she attended since childhood. He wasn't someone she thought much about. In fact, most people didn't. Ethan blended into the background. He had a reputation for being helpful fixing clocks, moving chairs, offering to read memorial pieces for grieving families. He was soft-spoken, polite, and always ready with words that sounded deeper than they probably were. To Hannah, he was just Ethan, a familiar presence, harmless, but those closest to her noticed something subtle. He lingered after conversations. He asked oddly specific questions. He remembered details Hannah barely recalled, sharing what book she was reading, what coffee she ordered, which morning she jogged by the river. At first, it came across as attentiveness, small-town kindness. But kindness has a line. And Ethan blurted. There were moments Hannah brushed off as nothing, finding notes tucked into hymnals with lines of poetry. Seeing his car parked near the same cafe she stopped at before work. Even catching him once, watching her from across the grocery store aisle a little too long. When she mentioned it to her friends, they laughed. That's just Ethan. He's awkward, not dangerous. Still, Hannah sometimes felt a twinge of unease. She told herself it was silly. After all, Cedar Falls wasn't the kind of place where people locked their doors. It was safe. Everyone knew everyone. But safety can be an illusion. Because while Hannah was planning lesson outlines for her students, someone else was planning her ending. And the words of that ending had already been written, tucked away in Ethan Mallory's journals, waiting for the day he would finally make fiction into reality. Thursday, October 17th, was a day that began like any other for Hannah Whitaker. She taught her morning classes, stayed late to finish grading papers, and told a colleague she was looking forward to baking cookies that weekend. No one imagined it would be the last time they saw her alive. By evening, the school hallways were silent. The janitor recalled hearing footsteps echo long after most teachers had gone. Heavy, deliberate steps. He assumed it was Hannah. But later he admitted the sound seemed wrong, slower, heavier, like someone walking without urgency but with purpose. Around 9 p.m., Hannah pulled into her apartment lot. A neighbor across the street saw her wave briefly before heading inside with her school bag slung over her shoulder. The light in her kitchen window flicked on. Then, 30 minutes later, it went dark. The next morning, Hannah didn't show up at school. That was unusual. She was never late. Phone calls went unanswered. Friends texted her. No reply. By afternoon, worry turned to panic. Police were called to do a welfare check. Officers entered her apartment that evening. The place looked almost untouched. Her shoes were neatly by the door. Her phone rested on the counter. Nothing was overturned. Nothing screamed violence. But there was one thing out of place: a single sheet of paper lying on the kitchen table. A handwritten poem. It read like a goodbye. Words about rivers, endings, and silence. But there was no signature. Hannah herself was gone. The community reeled. A search party formed. Flyers went up. Candles were lit outside the church. Neighbors clung to hope, praying Hannah would be found safe. Days later, that hope was shattered. Her body was discovered in a wooded area just outside Cedar Falls. She had been strangled. Her wrists bore faint marks as though she had been bound, but there were no signs of struggle in her apartment. Detectives concluded she must have known her killer, someone she trusted enough to let inside. The town went into mourning. The church filled with mourners dressed in black. People clutched each other, sobbing as the service began. And at the center of it all stood Ethan Mallory. He volunteered to read Hannah's eulogy. His voice trembled. His words carried weight. He spoke of her laughter, her kindness, her dedication to children. Congregants wept openly, believing he was grieving alongside them. But one person in the room wasn't convinced. Detective Laura Jensen, seated in the back pew, listened carefully. Something in Ethan's delivery felt rehearsed, too polished. And when he reached the final line, she froze. The exact words he read matched the poem found in Hannah's apartment. Coincidence? Or confession? Jensen left that church with a gnawing suspicion. The man comforting the town might actually be the one who destroyed it. And she was right. Because what Ethan had just performed in front of a grieving congregation wasn't just a eulogy. It was the killer reading his own script. Detective Laura Jensen left Hannah Whitaker's funeral with more questions than answers. The image of Ethan Mallory at the pulpit lingered in her mind. His voice had cracked at all the right moments. His pauses were timed like a playwright delivering lines. But what unsettled her most wasn't the performance, it was the familiarity. She had already seen those words. The exact phrasing appeared on the unsigned poem left on Hannah's kitchen table. That was too precise to ignore. The investigation quickly shifted gears. Officers retraced Hannah's final hours. Teachers confirmed she had stayed late at school. The janitor repeated his story about hearing footsteps in the hall. Neighbors swore they saw her return home. But beyond that, the trail went cold. There were no forced entries. No signs of robbery. Whoever killed her hadn't broken in, they had been invited inside. Detectives compiled a list of people close to Hannah. Family, friends, colleagues, and church members. Ethan Mallory's name was on it, but at first he ranked low. He had no criminal history. He was well regarded. He helped grieving families. He played hymns on Sundays. He seemed safe. But Jensen's gut said otherwise. She ordered a handwriting comparison. Analysts examined the poem from Hannah's apartment against Ethan's notes from church bulletins. The results were clear. The handwriting was a match. That discovery cracked the investigation wide open. A search warrant followed. Detectives combed through Ethan's modest house. What they found was chilling. Dozens of journals stacked neatly on a shelf. Inside, handwritten eulogies. Not just for Hannah but for other people in town. People who were still alive. Each eulogy detailed their lives, their quirks, even the way they might die. It was as if Ethan had been scripting deaths, writing endings before they happened. In one journal, police found a draft titled "Farewell, Hannah." The language was almost identical to what he had read at her funeral. He had prepared it weeks before her murder. Still, the prosecution needed more. They dug deeper into Ethan's history. Former acquaintances revealed unsettling stories. He had shown up uninvited at gatherings. He had written unsolicited poems for women in the church, some of which bordered on obsessive. A pattern emerged. Ethan fixated on women he admired from afar. And when admiration soured into resentment, his writing turned darker. Forensic teams recovered fibers from Ethan's car that matched Hannah's clothing. GPS data placed him near the wooded area the night she vanished. Layer by layer, the quiet church organist was stripped of his mask. But Ethan didn't confess. Not yet. He sat calmly in the interrogation room, insisting he was misunderstood. He claimed the journals were art. That he wrote what-ifs, not death scripts. That reading Hannah's eulogy was his way of honoring her, not incriminating himself. Detectives weren't convinced. And when they laid out the journal entries beside Hannah's final poem, the silence in that room spoke louder than words. Still, one haunting question remained. Were other deaths in Cedar Falls already written in Ethan's hand? And if so, how many more eulogies were waiting to come true? The trial of Ethan Mallory became the most talked about case Cedar Falls had ever seen. Reporters lined the courthouse steps. Families who had once sat beside him in pews now sat in the gallery, their eyes fixed on the man they thought they knew. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture. They presented the journals filled with pre-written eulogies. They displayed the poem found in Hannah's apartment. They showed handwriting matches, GPS records, and fibers that tied Ethan directly to her death. But the most devastating moment came when Detective Laura Jensen took the stand. She recounted sitting at Hannah's funeral, listening to Ethan deliver words that weren't just heartfelt, they were rehearsed. She told the jury how her stomach turned when she realized Hannah's killer wasn't only among them, but speaking to them. When Ethan was given the chance to testify, his demeanor was eerily calm. He admitted to writing Hannah's eulogy before she died, but he refused to call it evidence. He insisted it was creative writing, nothing more. His voice never shook. He never cried. It was as though he was detached from the gravity of the moment. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence: life in prison without parole. For Hannah's family, justice brought some relief. But as the court proceedings unfolded, more unsettling truths came to light. Several of the eulogies in Ethan's journals matched real deaths that had occurred in surrounding towns. Women whose cases were once ruled accidents, suicides, unsolved disappearances. The possibility that Hannah was not Ethan's only victim began to take hold. Prosecutors hinted at it. Investigators reopened cold cases. Families came forward, demanding answers. But Ethan never confessed to anything beyond Hannah. He sat behind bars, unflinching, almost as if he took pride in the speculation. To him, every whisper, every headline, every shiver of fear was part of the story he wanted to tell. And that's what unsettled Cedar Falls the most. Because while one man was locked away, the questions he left behind still haunt the community. Did he script more deaths? Were his journals roadmaps of crimes yet to be discovered? Or were they simply fantasies that never left the page? To this day, some locals refuse to walk by the church where Ethan once played the organ. They say the sound of his music lingers even in silence. Others say they can't bear to attend funerals anymore, fearing the words spoken might not be tributes, but premonitions. Hannah Whitaker's story ended in tragedy, but the mystery surrounding Ethan Mallory endures. And until every journal page is understood, until every death is examined, the truth may still be out there, waiting. Criminal psychologists who reviewed Ethan Mallory's case describe him as a narcissistic predator with obsessive-compulsive traits. Unlike impulsive killers who lash out in moments of rage, Ethan's crimes were meticulously premeditated. His journals revealed not only a fascination with death, but also a disturbing desire to control the narrative surrounding it. Experts point to a rare behavioral pattern: the author-killer mindset. Most offenders crave dominance in the act of killing. Ethan went further. He sought dominance over memory itself. By writing eulogies, he wasn't just taking lives, he was shaping how those lives would be remembered. To him, the story of death was as important as the act of killing. One profiler described it this way: Ethan saw himself as both playwright and performer. The murder was Act 1. The funeral was Act 2. Reading the eulogy was his curtain call. His behavior also revealed elements of pathological intimacy fantasy. Ethan inserted himself into victims' lives without permission. The poems and notes he left for Hannah weren't gestures of affection, they were rehearsals of ownership. By anticipating her death, by scripting it in his journals, he convinced himself she belonged to him in the most final way possible. Psychologists note that his calm demeanor in court wasn't unusual for individuals with psychopathic traits. His lack of remorse, his insistence that his writing was art, and his eerie composure even when confronted with overwhelming evidence all suggest a man who didn't see people as people. He saw them as characters. What's most chilling is that Ethan may have used empathy as a mask. He volunteered to comfort grieving families, offered to write tributes, and played music at funerals, all while secretly feeding on the emotional energy of those moments. This blending of predator and caretaker roles created what experts call dual identity camouflage. To the outside world, Ethan was a soft-spoken organist. To his victims, he was invisible until it was too late. And to himself, he was the author of their final chapters. Hannah Whitaker's story is not just about a life cut short. It's about trust. About how evil can wear the mask of kindness. About how the man who comforted the grieving was the very one who caused the grief. Her murder left Cedar Falls shaken, and her killer behind bars. But the haunting truth is this: we may never know how many of Ethan Mallory's eulogies were more than just words on a page. And that question still lingers: how many endings did he already write? This is Behind the Crime. If you found this case chilling, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the stories we uncover. If someone you trusted wrote your eulogy today, would you feel comforted? Or terrified?